Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. So welcome back to another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. So as always, I begin with lighting our candle, our village fire. Honoring in the circle that opens around it and around us. And welcoming you all into the space. And feeling how much this gathering together around this light, around this fire, is a heart calling. Not a head calling. We don't decide to gather with people around a fire. We feel called to it on some deeper heart level. So I honor your hearts. We honor the hearts of our ancestors, the hearts of the land around us, and all the beyond human kin. And this tapestry, this woven web of hearts. And so I know I've said this before, I never plan on what exactly it is I'm going to say in the grounding, but it seems to often have a lot to do with who's here today with me. And so how perfect to call in the hearts. So today I have with me my good friend, one-time mentor and teacher, and good friend and trusted peer, and so many other things, Dr. Christen Scott. And so I've known Christen for about 14 years, and she was one of the first yoga teachers I really connected with and whose offerings I found deeply transformational. And she and her husband, Preston, were the couple I chose to do my teacher training with back in 2013, my yoga teacher training, in big part because I have deep respect for how much they lead from love and by showing up in service and take a really holistic approach, like it's mind, body, and spirit. And over the years, Kristen's and my relationship, it feels like, has transformed from teacher, student, or mentor, mentee into like I said, peers and friends. And our friendship has gone through lots of ups and downs as we each kind of navigated our own journeys, and then the shifting sands of our dynamics and what we mean to each other. And yet it feels like we just keep finding ourselves on these parallel paths, and which feels really heartful and heart tender to me, that, to have that kind of relationship in my life. And so I'm really excited to have her on today and to sort of share her journey. And I think this conversation will probably be around love and grief and loss and community and whatever all else comes up in our conversation. And so her bio. So Christen Scott, she's got a doctorate in psychology, and she is an ERYT 500. So in the yoga teacher world, she's quite experienced and trained. And she's been an entrepreneur in health and wellness industry for over 20 years. She ran a very successful psychotherapy and consulting practice in the Washington, D.C. area prior to being exposed to the healing benefits of yoga in 2003. After taking her first yoga class, Dr. Scott experienced a peace of mind that she did not know was possible. She was immediately drawn to the emotional and mental benefits of the practice. She has seen more personal transformation on the yoga mat than in the therapy office. Thus, in 2010, after receiving extensive training in yoga and meditation, Dr. Scott closed her private practice, moved to South Florida with her husband, Preston Scott. She and her husband operated and taught at their yoga studio, the Power Yoga Tribe, in North Palm Beach from 2012 through 2019. Dr. Scott is the creator of the Yoga Shrink, which addresses mental health issues and personal development through yoga, philosophy, and mindfulness. She travels throughout the US and internationally, leading retreats and trainings on personal transformation. And Dr. Scott witnessed her husband transition unexpectedly in November 2021. Since that time, she's been on a healing grief journey that has led to a deep spiritual awakening. Her current work is focused around helping people heal their grief, incorporating more energetic and indigenous practices. So welcome, Christen.
Just lots of emoting and then everything's done. Kind of like a 2-year-old. And so I really identify with that. And I identify with my Italian, ancestors. And so I think that coming more from a love, a heart space, a body space, where people are much more touchy and physical. I think of the men are always like, you see, Italian men that hug and kiss each other on the cheek. And like, that's always the way I was brought up. And I just very, very, very much identify with that part of me. And I also think I identify also with this, I feel like they call it the crone age, sort of this age of postmenopausal, coming into a wiser woman role. I don't have any children, and just feel like I'm lately like stepping into this place of like everything as a woman, like the richness of what I've experienced and what I can offer is also something that I really can identify with.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I feel like we're not invited to honor and celebrate that like crone space, and at least in the US, our culture tends to be very age phobic. And particularly for women, there's sort of this encouragement to always look young and sort of be in that sort of perpetual like maidenhood space. And, I love you naming that, like, no, I fucking earned this. I fucking earned this shit. And like, I've paid prices for what I've got to offer now. And it's worth more than because of that,
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah. It's amazing. It's really beautiful. It's a powerful place, a quiet power, stillness, a little different than the doing, which has been most of my life and still is to some degree, but I can feel some of the being and, holding space and.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to sort of follow that thread right there a little bit, that being, because I know you've kind of been through a lot of different modalities and a lot, and I mean, I know, for the years that I've known you, we've had this conversation several times about like, yeah, you always felt like, all your doctorates and you're this and you're that, and like, and all the education and the achievements and the doing, and then sort of, and even I think psychology can be much more mentally focused. So it can exist a little bit more in that world. And then sort of that transition you found to like the yoga. So yeah, what's kind of been that, and then, with your, with Preston transitioning, with losing his physical form. And so, yeah, what has this sort of trajectory of like deepening into the beingness from the doing? What has that been like for you?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. It's, I think it was always like, the need to achieve. I think I always used to say, and I would see this as like, a badge of honor. Like if it's a 1%, I'll do it. If you only 1% get the doctorate, only 1% run the marathon, and like, I was like, yeah, cause and then I realized, well, because it was coming from a place of inadequacy and I needed to prove to myself that I was worthy, because I was in the 1%. And so I think with some of the awareness of where the achievement was coming from, that it was coming from an ego place of really not feeling good enough. And then not that, the achievement in the doing only like satisfies that, feeling of like the ego for, maybe 5 minutes and then you're on to like what the next thing is. So it's just a constant, like, it's just the constant like rat race that like just gerbil, in the hamster in the wheel. So I think that's exactly what it was. And it was like that it was like that for a long time. I think that it was like that for, I would say, most of my life until I started to do yoga, until I started like really finding, yoga more in my life, which was in, I had done yoga, over the years, but it was really like when I committed, which was 2003, when I really committed to practicing like consistently, when I found like I would stop thinking, and I was like, how is this
Mm,
possible? Like this stopped,
mm,
and I think that the stopping thinking was a place of being, like it was like I was just here, and I was like, oh, what is this? And that's where I think the peace of mind came in, was being in a place of being. Or where I did a lot of vinyasa, like really powerful practices. And then I finally in Shavasana could be like, oh, I can rest, but I had to
mhm,
do all that to rest.
mhm, mm,
And so I think that that's where the being, started to, enter into my life, from doing to being, starting to see how there was a value in that. And of course, then it's, get all the certifications in yoga.
yeah.
So just keep
Yeah.
following it. Let's go
Uh-huh.
back,
Yeah.
and do all of that. But also at the same time, it's like, I think it was like of some letting go and then some holding on, because I wanted to let go of my private practice, because I was realizing that that really wasn't serving me anymore, and that being in yoga was. And so, I closed my practice in the DC area, and Preston and I moved down to South Florida, and we opened a yoga community. And that definitely was more of a balance between the doing and being. But when you own your own business, there's a lot of doing,
A lot of
so
doing.
there's a lot of doing. And it was,
Yeah.
but there definitely was, I could feel more of the balance coming in, where sometimes I could be, and because I was teaching so much of that, and it was like, why was I teaching it? I wasn't just teaching it for others, it was landing for myself as well. And so it felt like more of a balance was coming in with the being and doing, and it sort of like would go, I think, more being, sometimes more doing. And then when Preston transitioned, in November of 2021, after that, it was, I mean, he died unexpectedly. So it was very, there was a lot of, there was a lot of trauma associated with it, because I was with him and he died unexpectedly. So there was so much of that my body just shut down. Like my body and mind just, stopped. It was like, there was no doing. Like it was, I remember saying, and I've said this to you and I've said this to my people, is like, wow, my nervous system is protecting me. Like it was just like, boom, no, like no more. Like
Mm,
I just could
mm,
do just enough. It was like, oh, I have to feed the dogs today and feed myself. And that's all. And that was okay. So it was like the grief and the trauma and the loss, it was like that gave me permission. I
mhm,
think about this. It's like
mm,
Preston transition to give me permission to finally be, and really be, and not be in a place of doing, because to some degree it was acceptable for a
mm,
small period of
mm,
time,
mm,
in society, for me
mhm,
to just be. Like I'd say, oh, I need to, oh, no, you just lost your heart. You can just
mm,
be. I mean, I don't
mhm.
find that now, which is only a year and 4 months later, when
Right.
I'm actually starting to grieve and I'm starting to
Right.
get beyond the trauma. But I think it also was because it was so traumatic,
Yeah.
I could just start to
Yeah.
be. And that has definitely, and we can talk about, that's just, I mean, it's continued to such a level. I mean, the level of acceptance of where I am and what is like, is just incredible to me. I always used to say to Preston, like, my intention is acceptance. He's like, you're good on acceptance. Like you've been working on that for years. Like it's time to move on. Right. And then you die. And then it's like, I always like say that to him. I'm like, really? Because now it's like I wouldn't have to be dealing with the ultimate acceptance of like who I am, like who I am. Like last week, I was in a grief place, in a deeper grief place. And it was like, it's okay. It's okay to do the bare minimum. It's okay to give myself time to feel what I'm feeling, to feel sad, to
Mm,
feel love, to
mm,
feel, everything, to feel what it feels like in my body, and I really feel that
mm,
the being has just continued and
mm.
continued to open. And the ultimate, you're absolutely right. The ultimate was, Preston transitioning was, it really just moved me, it catapulted me more like into a being place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I love sort of that piece right there. I mean, the whole thing, but particularly like that piece right there that you were just saying, that like that shedding of so many, we have so many ideas, some of which we've been taught, some of which we've chosen about like who we are. And it does. I mean, it feels like life. And it's interesting. Like, this is something I've heard some people talk about and have kind of explored. And, I've had some conversations with people around like sort of the idea of eldering and elderhood and what it is to like actually not just get older, but actually become elder, and I think so much of that is this sort of like constant stripping down or like gently removing, honoring, but shedding like these layers of who we think we are or who we think we're supposed to be to actually like become who we are, which isn't an identity and it isn't a role and it isn't a label. It's like a moment to moment emergent process. Like we
Mm-hmm.
are cells moving and breath moving and whatever, all like chemical reactions, right, and like and emotions rising and falling, and and we're just, I mean, that is actually what we are. And our mind like wants to make us all these other
Mm-hmm.
things because it feels more comfortable if we like have a
Mm-hmm.
form and we have an identity and we have a box and we have a label and a role, and then we can put other people in those same things. And and that's great for the mind, but like that's not actually at all what our experience is, which is like just this like complete, yeah, just like moment to moment existence.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like that can be really existential, or it can be like really beautiful and celebratory and maybe somewhere between the two.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, there was another thread there then that I was gonna sort of tease out a little more, but let's see, what was that? Well, oh yeah. So within that, kind of with those, I guess those identities, those roles, things like that, that you were sort of feeling shedding, shed. I don't know what the word is. Um, but as you're feeling that shedding and you're kind of coming into that place, and um what are some of the things that you're noticing that you're shedding, that even kind of, because I think and even particularly within sort of the spirituality and wellness world, right, like I'm really aware too as you're talking that we arrive at like the depth of understanding that we're available for at that moment, right, and then we
Mm-hmm.
like keep growing and we keep moving through those, and life keeps happening to us and inviting us into like deeper levels of understanding if we're willing to take that. And so I feel like you said, there's a lot of stuff that we start to teach or we say or we read somewhere and then really believe, and it's like it happened first at the mind and then maybe it starts to happen a little bit more in the body, and but it's like this unfolding process of deepening into understanding and understanding, and then also ability to really embody and live it in moment to moment. And so like
Mm.
what are some of the things that you feel like maybe you used to say or believe that sort of that have really like either come to feel false to you or just come to feel like you've reached a deeper layer with them, or sort of what are some of those like,
Yeah.
the things everybody
I
says that
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the first thing that I thought of what I shedded, what the first thing that was shed was the need to do, like what we just
yeah.
talked about, the need to do, because the need to achieve, the
Mhm.
need to um mm, uh, achieve anyway, like certain, like I think before Preston had transitioned, it was like, and then we're gonna do this and then this and then, like it
Mm.
was a planning, and the planning went away.
Mm.
I mean, yes, I plan, I have a schedule, I see people, it's like there's some plans, but not to the level. And some of it I think is also because I didn't know, that he was going to die. And so there's something to be said about that, I mean, it sounds like so trite and cliche, like, oh, like live the moment, and like be present and live in I mean, all yogic, all And then I embodied it from what you said. It was like, oh, we can just take we can be, wake up one morning and then have a heart attack and, not be here in the physical. And so I think that really that idea of like what I really was being present, was something that I was able to really stand into. So shedding more of the to-dos, the planning. I said this recently, like I used to get everything done. Like if you sent an email within 24 hours, it was a priority for me to respond. It was a priority for me to deal with business. Yeah, it's not a priority. Like not as much of a priority for me anymore. I mean, clearly when I have clients, if something's up, that's a priority. But I mean, little things, like, letting someone, it's just the minutia. Like I've really let that go. And I was so proud of that. Like it's so funny that I wore that as like something that I was accomplished and responsible and, reasonable according to society. Like I respond in a reasonable amount of time and I'm responsible. And like now it doesn't, like that stuff doesn't matter to me as if like I'm coming from a place of like presence and love and acceptance of myself and others and being. And, it's like I place the feeling in the being, which is what we started talking about, in more of a priority. And even letting people know, like I'll respond like, hey, we'll touch base with you in a day or two, I think in the past, I've always thought like, oh, people aren't going to like that. And people are fine with it. I think it's also from the place that I'm coming from, is that just prioritizing what's important to my life every day, like and like what is it every day, today I wake up and okay, like this is what I want and I remember hearing like teachers and mentors and people over the years saying that. I'm like, what is that? Like, how do you live like that? Like, that seems so, or not watching the news. I don't tap into a lot of what's going on in the world. I have hope friends like keep me abreast to major things. Not feeling like I need to know, I guess a little bit more in the natural world and not as much in the world of, I think a lot of that I have shed. I think there's been a lot and some fear. I think I shed too. Before Preston transitioned, we didn't talk about death, and I'm just like, what? That's all I talk about now. Like I'm just like the loss. I'm like loss. There's loss. Like let's have a conversation about that. Let me, And before. I think there was so much fear. And I used to say to him all the time, like, I'm good with my death. I'm just not good with yours. Like, and we'd laugh about it. And now I just, like someone was like, they'll just, I just I'm more willing to have those conversations. I'm not in fear of them. I'm not in fear of loss and death. And I see it as like, it's just another part of life. Like it's just and so that's been huge. That's been huge for me.
Yeah. Well, so much I'm hearing too, and kind of what you're sharing, these themes of like, like prioritizing aliveness, which in many ways is actually like a rewilding. Like, I feel like I often use that phrase, that, some of what I'm hearing you say is kind of this, like having been socialized a certain way and in ways that are actually really like counter to sort of our animal bodies, sort of the regularity, like responsible means like regular and means like linear time and means like doesn't matter what your emotions are or where you are in your hormone cycle for that month or like whatever, like that it's the 24-hour clock and it's like
right.
and you have to, and that's like a very machine-based constructed way of kind of trying to squeeze life into these like systems and frameworks that are not actually that connected to aliveness, and the ebbs and flows of that and the cycles and swirls and spirals of that and and all of that. And so I'm hearing too, a lot of what I'm hearing you share is sort of this like rewilding piece of like yeah, your body and your nervous system were like, haha, sucker, your brain thought you were in control all along.
Yes.
Like, nope, and then that death phobic piece. I mean, yeah, aliveness is not afraid of death. And so that's also part of our culture, right? Like, it's this, there's so much fear and like flight risk and like lack of nervous system capacity for aliveness, partly because we're so afraid of death. And so we're trying to control every aspect of life so that we like keep it sanitized and clean and like neutral and, and all of that. And yeah. And so I guess I think here's maybe a piece that I'm feeling like transitioning into this question of like, what is love? Because I don't know, as I said, that neutral, like it comes up for me that kind of that a lot of spiritual practices kind of encourage us towards this neutrality, or we interpret them that way in many ways because we're so used to kind of being in this sort of amped nervous system state a lot of the time that we sort of want to come into this like detachment, like kind of space. And so, yeah, I'm curious too, how, and maybe even particularly in this grief journey, like how that's, the difference between that initial shock and numbness and then the actual grief you're feeling now, or then kind of that detachment in some ways from kind of these like concrete things that you're realizing don't matter, but how that's maybe not inviting you into this place of neutrality. It's actually inviting you into like something that moves and flows and is felt more. I don't know, like, would those be your words for it? Tell me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I definitely think that, like I said, when he had first transitioned, it was trauma, it was numb. And I remember all I kept saying is, I just want to feel like this is really scary. I'm like, I feel like a sociopath. Like, I remember saying that to my brother, like, am I a sociopath? Because I have no feelings. And like, I know I'm not, I'm a psychologist. I think I know by 51, but it definitely I couldn't understand why I wasn't feeling. And I understand the need for my nervous system to shut down, to get numb, because it was so much shock. And then I noticed how my nervous system would like, and I think you even said this, it would titrate, like it would let a little out, and what I started to find was like that the grief, like that the sadness, when it started, or the whatever I was feeling emotionally it was love. Like it was just all like, it was my love for Preston was so deep. I mean, just like the way we loved each other was just like, it's going to definitely make me tear up because it's just incredible. And
it's gonna make me tear up too. So
and it was just like, when I would feel like sad and I would feel loss, like I would just like, I would feel my heart, and I would cry, but I would feel so much love at the same time. I would feel love and sadness, love and loss. And I felt like my heart was just like breaking open all the time, but it wasn't a heartbreak. Like it wasn't like it felt like it was breaking open to expand, and I think that's grief has shown me like how it feels like a deeper love than I had when Preston was here in the physical. And I can't really explain why, other than like, I can have multiple emotions. Like before, if I was angry at Preston, yeah, I'm like, I know I love him, but like, I'm really pissed off. And like, I couldn't access the love like in that moment, but I knew in my head I loved him. And with the grief, I can be sad. I'm really angry. Like, let me tell you, my anger was like, I mean, my grief reaction was there was a lot of anger, towards him, for leaving me, and I could be angry and love him at the same time. Like I could be sad and love, like so much that like the tears would be like I just felt like there was love that was just consuming like me, the room, everything. And I think that I felt like that right away, Kate. Like the night he died, I felt that. Like I was sitting on my living room couch, like where he died, which is where I'm sitting now.
Mm.
Um, and that makes me really happy,
Mhm.
and for some people it wouldn't, but it does for me. And I remember sitting here and I just was like this was happening for me. I really was like, I knew deeply that this was happening for me and not to me, even though it didn't make any sense. Um, and so I think that was Preston's love coming through. Like when we say love doesn't die, like that energy doesn't die, I think it was coming through in that moment, because that's what we would always say. Like things are happening for us. Everything's always working out for us,
Mhm.
even when it doesn't feel like it does. Like we trust in the process and the way things are unfolding. And that night I felt love, and I was kind of like in a weird space, because I'm just like, this is an odd, like, I'm like, I think I'm supposed to be acting differently. Like I think people are going to think I didn't love my husband, or like I'm in denial, like, I'm not really dealing. And so I didn't really share a lot of that for a while, because I was, I was afraid that people were going to judge me. And because I was really like in a more heart space than head space, and I'm not usually, that wasn't how I was. And so I just wanted to keep it to me and to a couple of people that I knew would keep it
Mhm.
honored and sacred. But I would say that night I felt more love. Like, and the night before, when he was like not feeling well and we didn't know he was dying, but like even that night, just the way we held each other, and there was more love than I had ever felt. And I always say, was this our inner beings that were just being like, okay, it's time, like, like we're not gonna, we're not gonna be here in the physical anymore. And but I really believe that. I really think that, like, that's what it was that like inner knowing of like a contract that was, was part of our souls. And so
Mhm.
I think that love really opened up in a big way for me
Mm.
that night. And then of course the next week was a little bit traumatic, with people coming in and then planning and doing the societal, like the things that we're supposed to be doing, which would be very different, I think, if this was 100 years ago or 200 years ago or
Mm.
300 or 1,000. I think it's like, well, you're going to make the arrangements and you got to do all this. And so it gets back into that kind of 3D, like, everything doing.
Mm.
And so that
Mm.
kind of took me out a little bit again, until memorial and services. And then I was kind of back into that space. But I would say, yeah, the love, um that thread of the love of what's unfolded has been, it's just been incredible. It's really, and our
Mm.
love is just, it just continues and it deepens. Like it just continues to deepen. And I just would have never known that in any other way. Like I just wouldn't have. I don't even know if I would have known that if anybody else had transitioned. Like, I don't know, but
Mm.
I just
Mm.
think because of who Preston and I were.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
Thank you, because it's so good to talk about it. And it's like when I tell people like, oh, my grief is sacred. My grief is a part of all of it. It's like, this is what it is, and it really gets to like share the beauty of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I was amazed by how affected I was by Preston's passing too. I mean, and we've sort of talked about that
Yeah.
a little bit, like personally, and just, um, yeah, I mean, he was a teacher in life and he was
Yep.
a teacher after life,
Yeah.
you know? And so, yeah. Mm. So I love that piece that you were saying, like that you feel like how your grief was met and how you were encouraged kind of to handle your grief was so different in our society now than it probably was like generations ago. And so, yeah, what do you feel like, based on this journey that you've been on, and all the different spiritual tools that you have, and all the things that you've experienced in this more like doing achieving phase of your
Yeah.
life, like what do you feel like and obviously grief is different for every person, and every person needs to be met a little bit differently, but what
Yeah.
do you feel like, based on sort of your experience and your background and your truth of it, like how would you have liked to have been met, or what kinds of rituals or ceremonies or like sort of collective community like grief spaces would you have wanted to be held in, or
Mm,
how
yeah.
can we take what you're realizing we're missing from the past today and like maybe create something for the future? What would that like
Yeah.
look like for
Yeah.
you anyway?
I think that the handful of things that was helpful, like, are probably things that were from, generations ago. Like the couple of, like, I would say, I did join a grief group. And that was because I just wanted to be around other people who were grieving. And I think that, normally we wouldn't have to go to a group, Google, like, where is there a grief group near me? But I knew that community, because tribes and community is where I've always found healing, and I believe where healing happens. And so I found a grief group, and it was actually a Christian based grief group. And I
Mm.
was like, okay, that's fine. I was raised Catholic. I'm good with that, whatever. I just wanted a group. And I found that just and I connected to two other women. Really, one was probably 20 years older. The other one was 35 years older. And the three of us really kind of formed this connection where we would get together and have coffee, and I would bring like baked goods. And it was just a time to get together and sit for an hour or two or three. And sometimes we talked about things, and sometimes we just watched her dogs. And so like, I do think that there were some things that really were healing to me. And that would be one thing, that if there was more of that in my life, like, I was lucky to have that. I was blessed to, have been, found that. And I think just being like, just going and sitting and being, and not having to do, anything, just bearing witness. Like, we've all had loss, and like, can we just gather with that commonality, like, and just like understand that we've, just not even, but just understanding, like, just being with other people that understood. I felt like that was something that if I had more of, that it wasn't like once a month or, whenever we could plan it, but it was something that was more of a, like, if I lived around more people, like, instead of in my house, like, where people would just even daily for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I think that's one thing. Another thing was I cooked for a friend that, once a week, a friend and her
Mhm.
husband. And when I could, sometimes I didn't feel like it. And the only reason I cooked is because I loved cooking for Preston, and they're not big cooks. And so it was my way of giving to others. Like, so I'm grieving, I can still serve, like, I can still
Mm.
give, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And I think it made me feel so like, and I ate with them instead of eating alone. Like, I have, like, my thing is to not eat when I'm like upset or stressed, and that's not healthy for my body and my soul and everything. And so, it was like, well, I could serve and I could eat, and I would eat my whole plate, and I would have seconds. And, it was just this community eating and sharing. And it wasn't all about Preston's transition. It was listening to their lives. And it was just, so I think there was like, how can I serve more? How could I help
Mm.
more? I
Mm.
think that would, it's, people want to do things for you, but it's also like, I'm still capable, and I'm still like, this is part of who I am. So I think it's also like, that was another piece I
Mm.
felt was really helpful. And just eating in community, like
Mm.
eating, like, people are saying, like, do you want to go get an acai bowl? Do you want to get, because I didn't like to eat alone. Like, it's like weird
Mhm.
little things like that. Like, friends would get on a Zoom and they'd be like, we could have dinner and why, we could talk. But it felt like I was around people, because it was really just me and the dogs. And thank God for the dogs, because they, they felt me, their unconditional love, they're energetically so aligned. They knew where I was and what I needed. But I think it was like more of that, just more of the, like, people would be like, what can I do? And, it's like, I don't know what I can do. Like, I don't know, like, so it was, I think it was more just, more community, more of that. Like, a friend would come and say, well, let's go, pick Monday, every other Monday, we're going to go for a walk in the woods. We're just going to go for a walk in the woods. And it was those couple of things that if I had, I think those were all healing. But the other, if that was more, and that was more of the way that we were with people. And I do think that is how we were, when we lived closer and we were more in community and we weren't like in our own homes or away and, all of that. I think the healing would have been, I just think it would have been more. Like, there would just be more, and more of what I needed. So, and the fixing, like, the not trying to change. I think all of those things were, no one was trying to change my grief. No one felt like it needed to be better. No one felt like I needed to be better. And then there were lots of people in my life that, like, if they called and I said, like, I'm just agitated and I'm really angry, like my grief is showing up in anger, and then I don't hear from them for months. And, or, have you tried this? Are you in therapy? Are you in therapy? Are you in therapy? I think I would be a rich woman if I had, $1 for every time someone said if I'm in therapy or counseling. And here I am, a psychologist, and I'm like, yeah, not everything needs psychotherapy. Okay. Not everything is pathological. Not that psychotherapy is about pathology, but I mean, not everything has to be changed or fixed. This is my life. Like, this is my process. And I think that was the big difference between showing up and just showing up, bearing witness and being, versus people that were trying to change the state that I was in.
Yeah. I mean, and so much of that has so much to do with our own capacity to be with our own grief, to be with our own fear of death, to be with our own mortality, to be with our own acceptance, to be with our own beingness, rather than doing, all of the things we've been talking about so far this conversation. It's like we can only extend to others what we can extend to ourselves, just to some extent. There are moments where, like, we're actually better at extending things to others than we are to extending them to ourselves. But in general, when it comes to capacity stuff, we usually shut other people down at the limits of our own capacity,
Yeah.
And so I mean, I remember reading somewhere that that in at least some cultures, if not many, most, all, there was like this understanding that when somebody passed, the person or people closest, the more immediate family, to that person, they kind of went into this like sacred lodge kind of space, and it was assumed they would be in there for a year. And so, yes, the community fed them and did things for them. But like you said, in a service place, like as I'm listening to you say that, it's like clicking that, like, the reason people did that was because grief was held as sacred. And they knew that person, by being in service to that person, as far as their material needs went, they would be able to come back to the community a year or so later and like be the crone, be the wiser. Like that it was an initiation, that it's like a portal opens, there's a threshold that person has been forced across. And if the container is right and the community is supporting them in the right ways, their spiritual understanding and their wisdom and their capacity and their empathy and their compassion and their ability to be this presence of love in the community would be vastly amplified, like exponentially. And so you be in service to that person and their material needs for that first year and, year, and then sometimes year and whatever, but specifically for that first year, because that's really the place where where the transformation is happening for that
Mm.
person. And then when they
Mhm.
come back into the community, there's a certain reverence that's attached because of what they've gone through and because of the wisdom they then have to share. And yeah, and so it just is like, and also the understanding too, it's like sometimes for me, it feels this way sometimes that it's like, so many of us were touched by Preston when he was alive, and so many of us were touched by him passing. And yet, because I didn't have the level of relationship with him that you did, of course I wouldn't. How could I? Like, that's
Mhm.
wasn't our role to have that with each other. And so, like, also in that kind of container, it feels like then you're supporting, like that person is also grieving on behalf of like if you were in that
Mm.
sacred lodge, you would be grieving on behalf of all of us who were grieving Preston,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so by like
Yes.
being in service to you and being in community with you during that period, then like some of my grief gets lessened
Yes.
because, or not lessened, but served or tended is a better word. Some of my grief gets tended by someone who's feeling it even more deeply than I possibly
Mm.
could,
Yes. I could
you
see
know?
that. I could totally see that. Yes.
And like, I don't know if that's true, but like, it's like, that's kind of what's like coming through to
Yeah.
me as we're having this conversation too. And, I've like, I had an experience one time where I was with a horse that was about to transition, a really elderly horse that was about to transition. And I remember reading somewhere, horses don't cry. They just don't have like the tear ducts for it. And so sometimes they actually want a human to come stand by them and cry for them.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
they receive the release through us crying, right? And I felt that sometimes with the earth too, when I'm out walking and I just suddenly feel this wave of like the earth's grief about like sort of the current trajectory that things are kind of going on,
Mhm.
and and yeah, and I'll just cry. And like, it's like sometimes we need that, whether it's like the sin eater or whatever you want to call it, whatever that role is, but that person who can like feel the thing deeply and then shed the tears, because the tears are part of how the energy gets released from this like holding pattern, and
Yeah.
part of how these like thresholds get navigated. And yeah, so anyway, I feel like I'm going off on this like whole sort of thing here, but like, yeah, I love what you're speaking to there. And I don't know, there's something that feels really powerful and potent to me as we're having this conversation around like, yeah, what would it look like if it were different? And, and
Yeah.
yeah, the no fixing and and I feel like, that idea of like doing things for people after they lose someone is like left over from
Yes.
these old
Yes.
traditions,
Yes.
but it's like somehow gotten a little bit divorced from like what the actual intention and purpose was behind it. And so then it kind
Yes.
of becomes, like you were saying, almost this kind of like overly coddling, like not actually that helpful, like kind of thing that you're experiencing, where people are like, I want to help, what can I do, what can I do? And like, and they're doing it from this place of like assuming that if they do something it will somehow fix your grief, instead of like, I'm doing this because like when you grieve on behalf of us all, and
Yeah, I
like,
do. I do. I have to tell you
mm,
this funny story that just came
yeah.
up as you're saying that. So a friend of mine, she's Italian, and the day after he died, my brother flew out and we're here. And people want to bring food, and everyone's like, don't bring Kristen food. Like it's gonna like she's gonna like trigger her and she's not gonna want to eat. And it was so funny. And my friend who's Italian, like very Italian, New Jersey Italian, like comes over and she's like, I'm coming over and I'll leave it at the door. Like it was one of these, like it wasn't, and again, it was like this cultural thing. And she came, but I let her in. She's like, I'm gonna knock, you don't have to answer, but I let her in. And she had brought like all Italian meats. It was the funniest thing. She's like, someone dies and you need meat. Like you need the prosciutto and you need
Yeah.
the super sod and you need that, right? And like,
Yeah.
I'll never forget that, because it was coming from that place of like, yeah, doing, but it really was from this, because my brother and I remember after the whole week, and it'd be late at night and we're up eating meat. And I said, like, if someone dies, we're bringing meat. Like this was the best thing ever, like Italian meat.
Mm,
But I think it was that Italian cult. Like, here
mm,
we go back to it was a cult. It was like my people my people
Mm,
came to me, you know, like as you're
mm,
saying this, like I have to reach out to her and tell her this because
mm,
it was so profound. And now I understand why it was so profound,
mm.
because she wasn't just bringing me food. She was like, it was like my
Bringing you
ancestors
culture. Yeah.
bringing me
Wow.
culture and bringing me the Italian meats. You know what I mean? Like literally, I'm like, I can't wait to tell my brother this later. Like it just opened everything up for me. And,
Mm,
you know, that's why I love to, you know, be able to have these conversations that like, it's like, oh, so much opens up when we have these, like, you know, when we, and that's what was that's that, like, I'm sitting here thinking like, this is what we need to be doing all the time. Like, why
yeah.
are we not doing more of this? And we'll
Yeah.
just heal the world, right? Like,
Right.
just everyone heals because it's just love. It's, you know, it's like, and that's the ultimate healer. And so that's what she did. She brought love, like in this ancestral love that came from
Mhm.
prosciutto, because like, you know, that's just what was. And
Mm,
yeah, I'm excited to share that with her. So
mm,
thank you for that, because that just
mm.
came out of that whole, yeah, that was really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and I think too, like certain foods are really grounding, and like whether
Mhm.
it's because they're sort of ancestral and that brings us deeper into our body, or then like the salt and fat is like
Yeah.
those are both really grounding things
Yeah.
actually for our body. And particularly, I think, you know, and obviously everybody's body's different. Some people's bodies really don't do well with meat, but in general, for most people, like, yeah, if your nervous system's fried, guess what? You actually often need some salt and some fat. They're like, there's a reason our bodies reach for certain foods when we're feeling certain emotions, you know?
Yeah.
And
That's so funny.
there's a lot of like, you know, what's the right word? I don't know. There's a lot of like, we have a lot of societal programming that may or may not be
Hmm. Hmm.
helpful around all of
Right.
that. And then there's a
Right.
lot of ways that we reach for salt and fat that are actually not the healthiest forms of salt and fat that we could reach for.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, there's a lot of uh imbalance, maybe would be a good word kind of
It's
there.
just so
But
funny. It's so
yeah.
funny. I can now, I'm thinking I was eating like Italian subs, like the whole, and I never eat Italian subs, but it was like I just wanted, you know, I that was
Mm,
it's yeah, I think that is, I wasn't, you know, that wasn't my plan to talk about that. But again, that's so important. Like it's that ancestral sort of like, you know, it's that it's healing. It's healing for the body to, you know, so interesting. So interesting.
mm, mm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. Like it is, I love these conversations, and I just think, I mean, you know, I think, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. If we had more of these, it would change things a lot, which is
Hmm.
part of what I'm, you know, aiming
Hmm.
to do here.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah. And again, particularly, I think this kind of ties back a little bit too to some of what you're, you know, to some of what you were saying with like that transition from kind of the psychology to like the yoga and sort of the more these ancient wisdom tradition practices, and then, you know, to some of the different things you've been doing since Preston transition and things like that. And so as you've kind of been, you know, like you said, moving away from sort of these models that are a little bit more based on
Mm.
pathology, you know, and kind of into more of this like community thing, and into more of these like sort of old ancient ways of knowing and relating, and whether that's through food, whether that's through, you know, conversation, like whatever it is, it feels like yeah, we're like the roots of the wounds are so much deeper than so many of our like modern Western responses to wounds can
Yeah,
actually take us, you know?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Because the roots of the wounds, yes, grief is grief, but like we don't actually need to heal grief. We actually need to heal the lack of support people have around their grief and the lack of helpful tools they have for living with their grief, you
Mm.
know? And
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
and so I think that's sort of some of what you were pointing to with that whole thing about pathology, and like, you know,
Yes.
yeah, we don't need to pathologize that. We actually need to like the wound is actually something else. The wound is not the grief. Grief
Right.
happens. The wound is like yeah, is do I have the tools? Have I been taught the tools? Do I have the support that isn't trying to fix me? Do I have the, the culture that actually like allows me to, that supports me
You're
in
so right.
the integration of this? Otherwise it's, I mean, that's the whole thing. Trauma is not what happened to us. It's whether or not we knew how to respond to what happened to us,
Right,
the
right,
capacity to
right.
respond to what happened to us, you know? And so, yeah, like grief itself doesn't have to be traumatic. It can be a shock. It can be a lot for our
Hmm.
nervous system to process. But as you're describing, like your nervous system is perfectly designed to numb you out when it needs to, and
Yep,
then to release little bits of grief as you're like expanding your capacity to deal with it.
yep.
And if you had the other things in place that would allow that process to just naturally and emergently happen,
Yeah,
and it's not a
yeah.
wound, it's just life.
It's so true. It's so true. And I tell people all the time, in all the grief books, they call it secondary losses.
Mm,
It's the secondary losses that create the wound.
mm,
It's not,
mm,
it's like, it's the society, it's the secondary losses, the friends that were your friends that don't want to be with you because they're in fear that they're going to lose their husband and they can't be around you because I'm like widow, like and so it's
mm,
all of those secondary losses, family members that don't know how to deal. And so there's strains in relationships. It's all sorts of like, that really is the
mm,
trauma,
mm,
it's
mm.
like, that is the perpetual trauma of daily, like Christen died a year and 4 months ago, and that's integrating into my life, and he died physically, and and that I can integrate in, but it's the day, it's more of like what you're talking about, and they call it secondary losses. And I just think, I always say, God, that was really the hardest, one of
Mm,
the hardest parts of it. So
mm, mm,
I completely agree, and I think it's because of more of that societal, people, belief system capacity to hold grief. My dogs, nature, my dogs, like, they're a reflection of what's going on with me. My
mm.
dogs are like, what, they're, when they're revved up, I mean, I can feel that much grief. Last week, I was like, please, I'm like having a hard time. And they're like, we know, like, and I'm just like, it's just like they're just reflecting what
Yeah.
is, or they just come up and they, Annie will lay on her back and it's just like, love on me, it's
Uh-huh.
like they can be there in a way that, sometimes people can't.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's that co-regulation, that co-attunement, we're literally wired for that. And yeah, if we don't have people that we can co-regulate with in ways that feel good to us based on what we're going through, yeah, we have to find something else to co-regulate with. So I love
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
nature, dogs, these other sort of purer consciousnesses. Um, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Well, I'm aware of our time, and also that you and I could just talk for days because we could.
We do.
We do, right. And no, again, this conversation around capacity, right? Like, it's funny. I mean, I feel like some of these podcast episodes, I'm like, oh, we could keep talking for forever. And then I'm like, but people don't actually have the capacity to take more in right now.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
maybe we just have you back sometime and like continue this conversation,
It's so true. It's so
Uh,
true.
we're so wired for that more is more when it's like
Yep.
really not, it's fascinating how insidious that little snake
Yes.
can be.
Yes. It is. It is. It's so true. It is.
Uh, so yeah, so with that said, is there, I want to offer you a chance to sort of talk about where people can find you, and if you have things coming up that you want to kind of invite people to be aware of. And then B, if there's anything you feel like you want to say, or you feel called to just kind of wrap this conversation for now with
Hmm. Hmm.
anything you feel like you need for completion for now.
I, I think just, love, community, I'm thinking like, it really, it's what I find to be, healing, if we're talking about, I mean, I don't even like to say healing, living, it's just, so much of what I've come to understand is like community, is love, is nature, those are really, that's what it's about. That's
Mhm.
how I want to live. It's just, that's the priority.
Mhm.
That's the priority. And I think that really kind of just really ties it up with a bow with
Mhm.
everything that we talked about. And
Mhm.
it's really how I'm moving forward in my life and moving away from, traditional, not that I was ever traditional, but moving even deeper into
Yeah.
more just more like indigenous healing and more community healing and more coming from a place of love. So I'm excited to see how that's going to unfold for the rest of my physical existence here. So
Mhm.
um in terms of where you can find me, I do have a website that I need to update, but it's good. It's got some stuff of what's going on in my life. It's yoga. It's
Okay.
www.yogashrinks.com. So that always has what's going on. And
Okay. And I'll have that in the
upcoming,
show notes too. I'll make sure that's in the show notes for people. So, yeah.
upcoming, I have I'm starting to do more retreats. I used to do
Mhm.
retreats. I used to do women's wellness and some international. And so I'm going to be doing a retreat in May that you potentially could be a part of.
Mhm.
And that will be in Naples, Florida. That's on the website, the 17th through, it's a women's retreat. It's a women's retreat on self-care.
Mhm.
So lots of yoga, meditation, and other yummy, self-care kind of modalities and connection and love and eating
Mhm.
good food. And that's really where most of the self-care is going to, so that kind of what we're
Mhm.
kind of talking about. So I'm looking to do more of that,
Yeah.
definitely to do more of that. I do one-on-one sessions, and that can be anywhere because of the beauty of Zoom,
Yeah.
so so I work with people, and all of that's on the website. So lots of services that I have done and that I'm moving into.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I know, yeah, you and I had been planning a retreat, collaborating on one a long
Yes,
time ago, and
right.
we should revisit that because,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I definitely think so, because I definitely want to start doing more of that,
Yeah.
because
Me
I feel
too.
like people in person, in community,
I
I
know.
just
I
like I
know.
forgot how
I
much,
feel that too.
like
Like,
like I didn't realize like how much I needed touch and being with in the physical. And I'm like,
yeah.
this is great. I
Yeah.
think it's like, it's that way of just the rationalizing, like, this is what we have. So this is great, and then we get back in person and we're like, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
we will definitely revisit that.
Yeah. And this is great when you also have in person, and it's great when you can't be in person.
Yes.
And it's not, we need something more real and tangible than just this too,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm feeling the same
Absolutely.
way. So yeah, I should. So stay tuned, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Now I'm excited. Yeah, that we definitely will talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love that. Well, thank you so much. So yeah, I invite everybody listening to just take a deep breath in and out with us, and just yeah, invite in integration, invite this conversation and whatever kind of landed for you about it to just gently settle deeper in, like maybe all the way down through muscle to fascia to bone to cell to atom, maybe even to DNA. And wherever you feel your capacity gently being stretched, if that happened, just maybe bring a hand to your heart and just let yourself feel that feeling of being held. Let your heart feel held for a moment by your hand. Or maybe a hand comes to your low belly, or wherever it would feel good to just feel yourself held for a moment. Inviting your capacity to just gently expand, hold a little bit more of whatever it is you're longing to have more capacity for. Maybe it's just love. So thank you all for being with us around the fire today. And as always, with these conversations, if it really spoke to you, love for you to share it. The point of this podcast is to get these conversations out into the world and to invite more people around the fire. So feel free to share this conversation, invite people to, rate the podcast. If, Spotify and other places have like ability to rate it. So rate it, or, like it or subscribe to it or whatever. Because again, all that helps in the algorithm so that people looking for these types of conversations, it's more likely to pop up in their search feed, their search results. And and that's the point. Let's build some community and have some conversation. So we'll see you next time around the fire.